think we're ready to roll. Let's do this.
Let's do this then. All right, Minnesota MUFON. I am proud and happy to welcome and introduce to you Scott Wolter. He's presenting The Secrets of the Lost Book of the Wars of the Lord Revealed. So Scott Wolter is renowned host of History Channel's America Unearthed and most recently Gaia's Mysteries of the Knights Templar, embarked on a quest into hidden history with the enigmatic Kensington Rune Stone appeared in his Minnesota lab in 2000. His journey spans continents, aiming to authenticate the stone and unveil the Templars' role in America's founding, a mission that began in 1362 and was completed by our Masonic Founding Fathers in 1776. Raised as a Master Mason in 2015, Wolter swiftly ascended to the ranks of the Scottish Rite and York Rite, achieving the esteemed 32nd degree, and was knighted as a Templar Knight in Commandery Zion No. As an author of 4 seminal works, including The Hooked X and Akhenaten to the Founding Fathers, Cryptic Code of the Templar in America, and Oak Island, the Knights Templar and the Holy Grail, Wolter uncovers the Templars' mission to establish a new Jerusalem in the West. His groundbreaking research, chronicled in his earlier book, The Kensington Rune Stone, Compelling New Evidence, continues to amaze readers with the in-depth detail provided on the scientific work performed on the artifact to prove its authenticity. Wolter, based in Minneapolis, balances his role as professional geologist and American Petrographic Services with his relentless pursuit of historical truths. So I actually went and saw the Kensington Rune Stone about 40 years ago or more, and I thought it was fantastic. And I've seen Scott present on the Kensington Rune Stone, and very compelling, very convincing stuff. And so one thing that I like about Scott, because I've seen him in person and I've seen him on TV, there's a term that's thrown around in ufology a lot called the skeptic. People go, well, I'm a skeptic, I'm a skeptic. And when I hear that, my ears always kind of prick a little bit. And I go, skeptic, what do they mean by that? And as I talk to them, I find out that most people that refer to themselves as skeptics are really more, they're really more cynics. And I think of a cynic as nothing will persuade a cynic except for the overwhelming tide of popular opinion. That's the only thing that's going to change a cynic's mind. But I hear Scott say that, and I listen to him talk and see his presentation. He's a true skeptic. He's what a skeptic really is. He's got his kind of conclusions and his take on reality, but he's very open to something that contradicts that. And if someone brings something contradictory to that, he will look at that in a very open mind and skeptical way and see if there's a logic and see if there's a pathway there. And he's open to being persuaded. And that's such I admire and respect that so much about Scott. He's not easily persuaded, but he's persuadable if it's really there and he really looks for the. So I mean, I guess I couldn't say how much I respect that level of authentic, genuine skepticism that Scott Wolter brings to his work, and I'm really happy to introduce him to you. So Minnesota MUFON, I know you're all muted, but give a great big Minnesota MUFON round of applause and welcome to Mr. Scott Wolter.
Wow, that was really a great introduction. Thank you so much. What you just said about cynics and skeptics is absolutely true. And I've run into a lot of people that their opinion is, well, all they're going to do is you can give them a compelling case, and then they're just going to try to find another avenue to dismiss or to be skeptical. And so it's hard sometimes to figure out who those people are, but I find that a lot of them are just a waste of time. And if they're not going to be persuaded by a convincing case, then they're not going to be persuaded by anything. So anyway, I thought you summed it up very well. So thank you. Okay, are we ready to go? Let's do this. Okay. Well, what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the Cremona document, and specifically I want to touch on aspects of something called the Book of the Wars of the Lord, which is something I had never heard of until I got involved in this research. So let's just go right to the beginning and start by talking about the Cremona document, which is basically a 12th century. It talks about the first story that came to us, and there are many stories that are involved in the Cremona document, but the first one that came to us that was presented and was very compelling and very important goes back to the very beginning of the Knights Templar in the 12th century. And this one specifically talks about a late 12th century Templar mission to Hunter Mountain. Hunter Mountain is located in upstate New York, about an hour away from Albany, New York. And it doesn't take long when you're up in that area to get in the middle of nowhere and that's where this temple is located. I'll talk a little bit more about it. I've been there many times. There still are caves there. There are carvings there. As far as documents and artifacts, those have been pretty much collected and moved, but the temple itself is still there, and it's a magical place. Let me just tell you that. Now, in this particular image, you see a photograph that was taken back in the early 1970s by a guy I'm going to introduce you to in just a second. And that is the original Cremona document. Now, on the right, you're going to see an artificial intelligence image of a Templar ship and some other ships in the background. But I have peppered a lot of these AI images because I think they're really beautiful throughout the presentation. And I was able to pirate these with permission from Gaia. They were the ones that generated these AI images, and they used them in the series that we made with brother Timothy Hogan called Mysteries of the Knights Templar. And thank you for mentioning that. So when you see these pictures, that's what they are. Okay. Now that gentleman that I was telling you about, his on the left, his name is Dr. Bill Jackson. Bill Jackson died in 2000. This was a picture taken of him in the mid 1960s when he was about 26 years old. The guy on the right is a very good friend of mine who's still living. He's 82 years old. He just celebrated his 82nd birthday on December 7th, about a month ago. And his name is Don Rue. And these are the two key characters that played a key role, well, played the only role in the generation of this story. There will be some other names mentioned, but it's these two guys that really are the ones that brought this story to us, and I'll explain how that happened. These two guys were best friends. They met when Bill was 11 years old and Don was 7, and they lived in the Bronx in New York City. They both worked for a private security company, and all I can tell you is these guys, along with several other people that worked for this private security company, were hired by military generals to do certain missions, certain work for our government that we'll just never hear about. And unless you've read some of the reports that I've read, but these guys did a lot of dangerous work that helped keep our nation safe. And that's about all I can really say about that. Don was one of the original founding members when the company was founded in 1961. Bill Jackson in 1962, when he was discharged after serving in the Korean War, needed a job, and Don got him involved in this company in 1962. And they worked for this company until eventually it was dissolved in 1994. Don was never married. So whenever Bill Jackson had adventures that he wanted to go on, Don was always available because he didn't have any obligations with the wife and kids, and he was always game. In 1971, these guys discovered a 12th century ship that was scuttled from that 6-ship expedition that came over in the late 12th century that I alluded to a while ago. This is important because when they found this ship scuba diving off the southern coast of Newfoundland, it convinced Bill that the story that he had acquired, this Cremona document material, was in fact true. And now Don at the time didn't really understand what was going on because Bill didn't tell him. And a lot of what we're going to talk about here didn't come to be realized by Don for many years, and in fact decades later, because Bill kept him in the dark on purpose. In 1977, they discovered Altamara's tomb. This is the temple of the goddess that I mentioned earlier on Hunter Mountain. And they found artifacts and remains inside this tomb. And that was the last we thought that these guys could do in the field to vet the material that they had, that Bill had acquired. And I'll get into that in just a second. But in fact, it was not the final mission. That's what we thought for a long time. In 1994, the same year that the company was dissolved, Bill Jackson sold this document to the Vatican. And when I first heard about this, I went, oh my God, Bill, anybody but them. I mean, of course, the Templars or the Roman Church would want to have a Templar document like this, but anyway, there's more to the story, but this is what we were led to believe for a number of years. And then Bill passed away, as I said, in 2000. In 2004, Don inherited Bill Jackson's research when his son Mark turned over all of his father's research that they had in their possession to Don in 2004. And this is when things really began to pick up speed. Now, we have to go back to 1968, which is really where this story begins. One of the things that Bill and Don and some of their other colleagues that worked for the agency liked to do was to go up into the Hudson River to Bannerman Island and go scuba diving off the island, because I think it was 1958, Francis Bannerman, who owned the island and built those ruins that you now see there, was an arms dealer, and he and his son sold weapons to whoever would buy them, starting during the Civil War and eventually in the lead up to World War I. And they made a lot of money doing it, but they stored these munitions on the island. And in 1958, they blew up and everything got blown into the water. So what Bill and Don were doing is they were snorkeling and scuba diving, looking for these munitions that had been blown into the water. Then they would go back into the city and they would pawn them and they would make money. Now, this started in 1968, and it was in 1968 that Don actually found two of these, and these are replicas of these ornaments that had blown off the island from the flower gardens that Mrs. Bannerman used to tend to. She was a gardener, and Don found two of these. And he knew that Bill Jackson's wife, Muriel, was also a gardener, so he gave them to Bill, and Bill's wife installed them in their own garden. Now, in 1971, in 1969, a year later, after Don had found these ornaments, Mark Jackson, who was 5 years old at the time, was playing in the flower gardens, and he grabbed one of these ornaments and he broke it off. It hit the ground, it broke, and they discovered that it was hollow. And inside it contained a couple of artifacts. One of the artifacts was a clay tube about 4 inches long that was sealed on either end with beeswax. Inside that clay tube were these two parchments. Now, on the right, one of the parchments, we're showing both sides of it, is covered in a strange script called Theban script. In fact, both of them were covered on both sides with Theban script. And I'm just going to ask you to hold that thought for right now. I'm going to come back to that because it took many years for this Theban script to be deciphered. It turns out the message is a long lost heretical biblical message that was encrypted in this Theban script, but it's written in 2 different languages, but the message is the exact same message. We'll get back to that later. The other thing that was inside of the decorative ornament was this brass seal. And standing on the right there is Don at the exact location where he found one of those ornaments, the one that actually had the artifacts inside of it. Now, you can see on the left that there's some inscriptions that have been etched into the metal. And on the other side, you can see that it actually opens up. And inside there were metal inserts. You can see one of them, a round piece that was in there, but there were a few other metal inserts inside this brass disc, which actually is a navigation device. Now, it was a word that was etched into one of these metal inserts inside this brass device that led Bill Jackson to Europe, and eventually for him to purchase a document from the 1700s and it was authored by two men. And what he did was he chased down the descendants of both of the authors of this particular pamphlet. And that's what led him to Rome, where he was able in early 1971 to purchase the Cremona document. Now, the Cremona document, and here you see the first page, what we'll call the cover page, and in Latin it says Veritas vos liberabit. And when you translate that into English, it says the truth will set you free. Now, when we're talking about the Templars, we're talking about an organization that was founded in the early 12th century. And what you're looking at in this document is not something that dates back to the 12th century or the 14th century or even the 18th century. This was recopied multiple times. The Templars did updates over the centuries of the maps and material that they had. The last update was done in 1908, and that's what you're looking at here. So I don't want anyone to think that this particular document dates back to that time period. The information in it dates back to that time period, but it was recopied in 1908. I'll get to a little more of that later on. Now, the document is comprised of reports, 28 maps, including the one on the left there. For those of you that are fans of the Curse of Oak Island show, that is one of the maps that they've been using on that show for about a dozen years. Now, I'm not going to go into the politics behind it or exactly what happened, but they have no rights to even have that map. That map belongs to Don. It was given to them by Zena Halpern, and Zena had no right to give it to them. Nor did she have a right to give them the Oak Island map that they've been using almost every episode for the last several years, but that's another story. But that material came from the Cremona document, and they're treating it 100% authentic because it is authentic. Anyway, we have 28 maps. They have 2 of them. And they've milked 12 episodes of that show out of 2 maps. It's incredible. We have letters. This one dates back to the mid-1700s. That's an original letter. And 18 encrypted messages. Now, if you look at this particular message here, which turns out to be a list of the documents that the Templars recovered on that late 12th century trip to North America, specifically to the Temple of the Goddess. Because at the Temple of the Goddess, what was there and being protected by the people that lived there were documents that dated back to biblical times and beyond. And one of the documents that was recovered in 1178, 1179 was the marriage document of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And eventually that copy was brought back to Europe. Copies were made of that. One copy went to the church. The other one stayed with the order. Now, so let's go back and talk about some of the documents that have come forward over the years. As I said, in 2004, Mark Jackson turned over all of his father's documents to Don Rue. But in 2008, something really interesting happened. This print, this artwork that is a print, it's not an original, of a place along the Hudson River that was near and dear to Don and Bill Jackson. Bill had this print and he gave it to Don as a gift in the 1990s because in 1994, Bill Jackson realized as a medical doctor himself that he was dying of arterial sclerosis and Parkinson's disease. And that's why he sold the document. But what he didn't tell us is what I'm telling you now. Now, one of the things he did was he gave this print to Don. And it wasn't until 2008 that Don was clearing out his storage shed. He didn't have enough room in his townhouse to hang this particular old print. So he was going to throw it out. And when he picked it up, it fell apart. And he discovered on the back cardboard sheet behind the print were 2 floppy disks that had been attached to the back, and you can see where they were attached. And inside those floppy disks that he eventually had printed out, the material printed out. There wasn't a lot of data stored on there. It was simply a Word file, but it was the story of that 12th century journey to North America to recover those scrolls, and it was called A Year We Remember. But it was hidden behind that print, and Don found it in 2008, and that's when I became heavily involved in the story as well. I met Don in 2006, but it was in 2008 when myself, Zena Halpern, and some other people initially got involved. In 2017, I happened to be visiting Don. I was driving out on the East Coast doing research, and I just popped in on him. And it was funny because I remember going into the kitchen, and here was a picture of him with Rick Lagina, and one of the other guys on the show had just been there to visit him. Don had taken a picture, and he put it on his fridge. And I said, "What the hell, Don?" I said, "Was Rick Lagina here?" He said, "Yeah, he was here a couple of weeks ago." I said, "Well, what did he want?" "Well, what do you think he wanted?" "He wanted Cremona document material." And I said, "Well, what did you do?" And he said, "Well, he offered me a contract." And he said, "It's right here. I want you to read it. You're in the TV business. You tell me what you think." So I read the contract and I said, "Don, this is a great contract. He wants you to give you all of their documents, all of your artifacts. They're not going to pay you anything, but like Xena, you can get your 15 minutes of fame and a pat on the back. And these guys are going to get literally millions of dollars worth of content for their show and put that money in their pocket." I said, "This is a great deal, Don. I'd sign it right away." "I'm not signing that contract." And then I looked at him and I said, "Well, how about signing a deal with me?" And he did. So that was kind of fun. But then after that, he pulled out an envelope and he said, "Take a look at this." And it was an envelope, and it was addressed to Don from Melissa Jackson, Bill Jackson's daughter. And this was the first batch of material that suddenly we realized that that Bill had not turned everything over to the Vatican in 1994. In fact, he only sold them a very small bit. When I sit here in January of 2025 and I look back at everything that has come to us. But this page that you see right here that is also written in Theban is page 1 of A Year We Remember. And Bill had translated everything, transcribed it, and that was the document hidden behind the picture that was written in English. But this is the original first page. He sold everything else to the Vatican. But if you look at the top, you see where it says Elis Capitolina? That is Latin for the original name of Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. And this is the cipher phrase you need to decode the document. So Bill had pulled out the cipher and essentially sold the Vatican a worthless document because without page 1, you can't decode it. And I sat there and I laughed and I said, "Bill Jackson, you knew exactly what you were doing." And I just wish I had had a chance to meet him. But in addition to this first page, there were 2 more treasure maps. I showed you 2, which included that Nova Scotia map they're using on the Oak Island show. We knew at that time that there were 4 maps. Now there were 2 more for a total of 6 maps, but that's not the end of it. In 2019, one of Bill Jackson and Don's colleagues, John Drake, passed away. And it turns out Bill had given him some material with strict instructions upon his death that this material, that his estate was to turn this material over to Don Rue. And if you go back sometime and you look at those maps that I'm talking about, there are numbers that are put in specific places on all of those maps, but there's no reference to what those numbers mean. These 2 pages are numbered with notes written in French about what specifically was going on or important about that location. And all I can tell you is what is written in here is absolute historical gold. He also gave us the Louis Latour letter, which was that one I showed you that was written in the late 1700s. I'm not going to talk about that. In 2020, John Lennon passed away. Not that John Lennon, a guy named John Lennon who actually worked for Scotland Yard. And anytime somebody with the agency went over to the British Isles, John Lennon would be the liaison who would meet with them and help them get around and do whatever they needed to do. When he passed away, this particular encrypted document was left to Don, and it was a treasure hunt that he and I and some others went on. And we found stuff. I don't have time to tell you about it, but it was a blast. I'm going to write about it in my next book. In 2021, the man that founded the company, Dan Spartan, passed away. And he left Don with this puzzle box, which included map 8. So now we know there are 8 maps. But the amazing thing about map 8 is it contained 13 parts. Those of you that are familiar with the Fibonacci sequence might recognize that the numbers 8 and 13 are part of that sequence. That is not a coincidence at all, folks, but I don't have time to go into that either. In 2022, Dave Ryan, the cryptographer, he was the one that Don sent the floppy disk to that was able to convert those Word files and print them out for us. But he passed away in 2018, but this message didn't get to us until 2022. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. But it was a very long cryptogram that you see right there on the right that has, you'll notice, 13 parts. Again, this is not a coincidence. So in 2022, that encrypted message led Don and I on another treasure hunt into the Adirondack Mountains, deep into the Adirondack Mountains. And we found a small treasure there. And we still have the crosses, the coins. We haven't told anybody about this yet. We haven't shown anybody this stuff yet, but we will. So as we were hiking out, I looked at Don and I took this selfie of Don and I. And then I looked at Don and I said, Don, is there anyone left? Are any of your colleagues still living that might pass away and leave us more stuff? And he looked at me and he said, no, I think that's it. And then he sat for a second and then he looked at me and he said, Bill had a girlfriend. And we tracked her down. This was in the fall of 2022. In January of 2023, we found her. Well, actually, we found her cousin. The girlfriend had passed away, but she had given all this material to her cousin. Her name was Roberta. And we call it Roberta's Trove. And if you look here on the right, you will see there's a note that she wrote. This is a photocopy. I keep the originals. There is more in the attic. When I find, I will send. RAF. Those are her initials. Now, if you look at that handwriting, it almost looks like the handwriting of a child. But the truth is, she had recently had a stroke, so her handwriting was labored. Now, in January of 2023, we got the first message and a brand new Oak Island map the world has never seen. In February, we got 4 more messages, 2, 3, 4, and 5. There was a total of 21 encrypted pages and 2 pages of drawings of the underground project. The underground project is what they called, back in the 14th century when they started it, the underground workings of Oak Island. So if you want to know the answers to the Oak Island mystery, the Templars were involved, yes. There was a treasure that was buried there, yes. But it was recovered in 1769. The brothers are digging in a dry hole. But they've already recovered the treasure. and the treasure is the gold that they've mined from their audience after 12 years of nothing. But in any case, in March, Don found an invisible message. And actually, we have about half a dozen invisible messages in the Cremona document material. And what I mean by that is messages written in invisible ink. In some cases, it'll come out with black light. In other cases, we have to use lemon juice and heat. But that particular message had nothing to do with Oak Island, but it was amazing information that is not germane to this discussion today, but just amazing stuff. In August of 2023, a little over a year ago now, Roberta had another stroke, and on the way to the hospital, she passed away. Now, this is part of message number 1, and it's very important to understand certain things. In 1304, Louis de Gremord, by order of Grand Master Jacques de Molay, arranged, I got to move this over so I can see what it says, arranged for 3 ships to embark from La Rochelle, that's the western port in France, to Locale de Ramsey and Pointe de Air and Leith de Saddle, the Isle of Man. So when we decoded this message, there was a lot of important things that we learned here. First and foremost, the Templars were not surprised on October 13th of 1307. They knew full well that a put down was coming, and they were prepared for it. And they got all their treasure, their artifacts, their documents, everything was gone from the treasury in Paris, France, and this effort began in 1304. In this particular message, and I'm showing you some of my work decoding this message, it was laborious. It took me 2 months. I made several mistakes, but you can see this is a lot of work decoding these messages once you get the cipher phrase. And if you look at the very top, the cipher phrase for this particular message that had over 6,000 characters, the cipher phrase was, "The power of God is within you." And about every 20 or 30 lines, you can see down near the bottom of that page, you see in orange, it says, "The power of God is within you." If you don't get that cipher phrase correct, then you screwed up what you had just deciphered and you have to start over. So it was that cipher phrase that occurs within this message of 6,000 characters. Guess how many times it occurred? 13 times. Okay. The Mickey Macs bring us squash, beans. The power of God is within you. That's the cipher. And maize ground. That's food, right? The 3 sisters. We kill 14 bear and 16 deer. We share with them. They show us how to make coats and clothes. He's talking about the natives, of course. It is 1395. Lionel the Sixth grows strong like his father. That would be Lionel the Fifth. He has 2 sons. That would be Lionel the Seventh. And 1 girl. I am his 2nd son. Uriel pledged to the service of the angel K. Now we're starting to get into the fun stuff. When we deciphered this message, I looked at Don. I said, "Don, who the hell is K?" Now, this is a letter that's dated 1656. It's a copy. It's not the original. But what's really important here is, remember I told you in the late 12th century when the Templars came over with 6 ships, they lost one off the southern coast of Newfoundland, but then they dropped off 26 people that hiked their way to Hunter Mountain, to the Temple of the Goddess. By the way, guys, does the number 26 mean anything to you? 2 times 13, right? Must be another coincidence. In any case, what this letter, I'm going to paraphrase what this letter says. is that when Lionel de Waldern came over in 1178-79, he recovered half of the scrolls. I also told you that one of those scrolls was the marriage document of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. They did not bring back the other half of the scrolls. This is a list of those other scrolls, and I'm going to read these other scrolls. I send 4 bound boxes with 13 scrolls of Adoniram, 26 of Pharaoh's scrolls, 129 of Euripides, 9 of the Kohan, 16 of ours, 8 of Yeshua. You guys know who Yeshua is, right?
Yes, I do, but I don't know if everyone does.
Well, you should tell them.
Yeshua is the name of Jesus.
That is his Hebrew name. So apparently there are 8 scrolls that were written by him that were hidden in North America. That's interesting, isn't it? And the history of the Celts. I have also sent the book of the wars of the Lord. All go north. And what that means is they were heading up to Montreal. I can't go into the details behind that, but we know exactly what was going on at this time. A church was being built by the tradition where these documents were going to be hidden. Although something happened on the way north. The book of the wars of the Lord took a detour. Now, remember I mentioned Dave Ryan, the cryptographer who died in 2018? His wife gave Don these 2 wall hangings, these extremely ugly wall hangings. And Don had them in his apartment or in his townhouse. And one day he set one on the side of a cabinet on the floor, and he accidentally kicked it. And he realized that something shook inside of it. There was something inside of it. So we opened it. I was with him when we opened it. And inside, we found this long encrypted message. And there's some pretty interesting things. One of the things that got me excited was this Roman numeral date at the top that is the date 1898. Now, 1898 doesn't mean anything to you guys, but it means something to me because that was the year that Olaf Ullman discovered the Kensington Rune Stone in Kensington, Minnesota. And if you look, there's kind of a blotch there in the upper right arm of the X symbol, the 10. That's actually a hooked X. That's my hooked X that I've written a book about. And the hooked X occurs all through these documents. Usually every document has at least one hooked X symbol. To me, that is a symbol of authenticity. The hooked X represents the essence of the true ideology of the Templars and the tradition that is behind all of this stuff that is ancient, that I'll talk about in just a little bit. 13 parts again. And there's a reason why the number is so sacred. The number of 13 is synonymous with the goddess, and it has to do with the planet Venus. It has to do with the moon, the 13 synodic cycles of the moon that are both related to the feminine aspect of the Godhead, i.e. the goddess. So the number 13 is associated with the goddess. And for those of you that remember that even today we still don't have a 13th floor in many buildings, the reason for that is the church demonized the number 13. They made it Bad Luck Friday, which is a bunch of BS. It was all about suppressing the feminine. And these encrypted numbers and not so encrypted numbers are there honoring the sacred feminine. So that's what's going on here. Now, this is that message decoded. And I want you guys listening to tell me what you think, because I'm going to tell you what I think right now. I saw the lights again. Could be an ill omen. The right one descended upon my winter lodge, and behold, there stood the likeness of Ammon, not a man. I went back about a half dozen times. That letter is an O. And you also have to understand these messages are in scripto continua. There's no punctuations. rarely is there punctuation, but there is never any separation between the words. So you have to figure out what the words were. Or what the words are. I thought that was a man, and I tried to make it a man, but it's not a man.
I would like to point something
It's
out
a man.
real quick. I'm going to jump in here and point out that
This is Haley Allison Ramsey.
hi. I wanted to point out that in the book of Ezekiel, this is very reminiscent, where it says, "There stood the likeness of a man," and this is talking about in Ezekiel's visions. And so if you go to Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 26 through 27, that's where you'll find that, if you want to go back and look at this. So it's comparable there. So there might be some sort of connection between these two books.
I think you might be right. Do I owe anything for that?
And Scott, are you open to questions right now or no?
Sure, if someone wants to jump in,
So
sure.
if someone's got a question, there's a react button down at the bottom of your screen. Click your react button and raise your hand. When I see your hand raised, I'll unmute you so you can talk to Scott directly. So feel free to raise your hand if you got a question.
And do you have a BS button? Anyone want to call BS? They can push that button too.
Mine's broken, so I can't use it.
Okay, yeah, you used it. You hit it too many times, right? Okay, let's get back to this. He was of common dress and medium height. He had about the eyes shone a light blue. He spake unto me in the tongue of the people. Can ye understand me? I replied, Yea, but thou speakest not my native tongue, English. He then spake unto me in English, saying, Our Lord has again need of thee. Now, what I'm going to tell you is the person that this Aman is talking to is CLY. CLY is the one who recopied the document in 1908. We see his initials throughout the documents, and it wasn't until we got the Dan Spartan box that we found out what his real name was, Clyphus Lucinius Jarbo. He also has an indigenous name we're going to learn at the end of this message because he was married to an indigenous woman. Now, I'm not giving the entire message here because a lot of it is the route that he took, but his mission was to go recover the book of the wars of the Lord that in the previous letter is mentioned that they're going to take to the north. But on the way up to Montreal, they diverted in the Adirondacks and they hid the book of the wars of the Lord in a separate place. Now, you remember when I showed you that picture of Don and I taking a break after we went on that treasure hunt? That's where we went, is to where they put the book of the wars of the Lord. Now, in this message we got after we went on that hike. So, I know the lights are of angels, yet all are not of the Lord. Some are of his brother. So has passed the scroll of the wars of the Lord from the world of men. Know by the sigil of my ancestors, all I write is true. Talico, which I think it's Mohawk, not Mohawk. It's an indigenous tribe, particular indigenous tribe. It means gray eagle. And there's his initials, CLY. The password we were given was AK Candle Saga. That was at the bottom of the message, but that was an anagram. And it turns out that the cipher that we needed to decode this message was Sacandaga Lake. And actually, it wasn't too hard to figure out because there aren't that many words in the English language that have 4 A's in them. So that's how we figured that one out. So what have we got here? Apparently, the book of the wars of the Lord was something that the Vatican did not want the world to be aware of. But yet the Templars had a copy of it all the way up until 1898. And then somebody came from the heavens and took it back. The hell? That's how we interpret this message. Now hold that thought. Let's keep going. I think yeah, there's AK Candle Saga. That was the anagram that ended up giving us the cipher. Here's Dan Spartan's box. It's a picture, the only picture I have of Dan Spartan. He's on the right. That was taken in 1968. So we opened this box, and there were a number of things inside of it, including that original letter that told us about the documents going north. But there was also this cipher. And it also has an anagram if you look below the wheel. And those symbols on the 12 spokes of that wheel are actually zodiac symbols. So we call this the zodiac cipher. And you see there's an anagram there, right? To the right of the wheel. And then you can see the lines of text on the right. Now, we were able to figure out this cryptogram because we had the anagram. And that anagram, AADEEMMNRSTW, that is in alphabetical order. But actually what it says is New Amsterdam. So once you get the cipher, now you can put those rows of letters in the proper order. They're arranged horizontally. You have to align them vertically in the correct sequence, and then you get the message. This particular message, I'm explaining how to decode it, put them in numerical sequence, find the zodiac symbol on the wheel, align the letters after the symbol vertically, not horizontally, and then you decode the message. And this was that message, and that's our work on the right. This document, meaning the Cremona document, has been removed from the Vatican Library's secret archives by Brother Schoner, a Cistercian legate of Fidencio of Padua to Helvetia, then to Lisbon by Brother Andrew Michael Ramsey. Andrew Michael Ramsey is a ancestor of Halley's. We know a lot about him. He gave a lecture back in the late 18th century called Ramsey's Oration. And basically what he did is he argued that the medieval Knights Templar evolved into modern Freemasonry. And he gave a very compelling argument, but Masonic scholars to this day would not accept his argument because he didn't have factual documentation or evidence that he shared with people. Well, it turns out he did have it. He just couldn't share it. And that was the Cremona document. It was then moved to England in 1730 by Samuel Pritchard and hidden in Wales by Gwadine Roche. Then moved to London by George Cruikshank, who had it bound in a volume titled Sir John Falstaff, 1858. Do you remember that first picture I showed you of the Cremona document, that sort of brown cover? That is the Sir John Falstaff book, but it was a blank copy of it. Anyway, copied by Grand Lodge of Denmark, then to the Lodge of Prince Edward Island, 1875, by Lionel de Waldern, June 24, 1875, after which it was passed to the hands of Olaf Palm. By the way, June 24 is St. John the Baptist Day, which is he's the patron saint of the Knights Templar and of Freemasonry, to the hands of Olaf Palm, Lesper Chatura by Vitruvius, and then lost to time. Now, this just gives us a little history of where the document went, but let's get back. The reason that I told you about that zodiac code is because the anagram of New Amsterdam turned out to be the same anagram for this message that Don and Bill found 40 years ago in a cave in upstate Vermont. And they couldn't decipher it back then. So after we did this message, Don pulled out this old message that they found back then, and we decoded it because it turned out New Amsterdam was the same cipher. Now, we call it Halley's Gold Cave because there was a mission that these guys did back in the early 1970s where an 8-year-old girl named Haley was kidnapped by bikers. Her mother, her father had died. He was a Canadian politician. And then she fell into this guy who was in a motorcycle gang, and he tried to kill her, his wife, because he wanted the money. And then he kidnapped the girl, and he was going to kill her because then he would inherit all the money. Well, they got Dan Spartan, Bill Jackson, and Don Rue involved in the project. They were able to rescue her. And then a few years later, she gave them a gold mine. And inside that gold mine is where they found this cryptogram. It's a long story. I've read the report. I'm not going to go into it, but this is the stone that was wedged into the wall. They pulled it out, and that's where they found this cryptogram. But they couldn't decode it until we got New Amsterdam in 2021. Now, it turns out this message is one of the lost parts of the book of the Wars of the Lord. And it says this, Yah and Wei, the children of the Yazidi against the law of Aku, they beget 2 childs, Adam and Eve, who became us. And what they talk about here is the secret word of God in the Hebrew priesthood that we know as Yahweh is not the right word. The right word is actually pronounced when you pull the word apart into Yah and Wei and pronounce it inside out. And it's actually pronounced Huhi. And that is the true word. And what it means is it's a dual gendered Godhead, male and female, which of course was a secret right up to this day in the Hebrew priesthood that they did not want the Romans to know about. And of course, I believe that the Roman Church has had this document for a long time, and they just haven't made it known to us because they don't want this getting out. And it's obvious why they don't. But this is one part of the book of the Wars of the Lord, and it talks about a dual gendered Godhead. Now, this is the Kensington Rune Stone, and I mentioned the hooked X. In every one of these documents, we have a hooked X. So it's the same people that were in charge of these documents that carved the Kensington Rune Stone. In fact, in my new book, I'm going to tell you the name of the guy that carved the rune stone. We know his name from the Cremona document. But the point is, this is all part of the pre-Columbian Templar activities that took place in North America. We know the details of what happened here. It wasn't just about burying treasure. It was about the documents. It was about the maps. It was about the technology, the ideology, and it was about the relics. So this is the Kensington Rune Stone. This is that enigmatic symbol that the scholars all dismissed because they didn't know what it was. They were too damn afraid to say a few little words. I don't know. It's okay to say it. It's not going to hurt you. And sometimes you have to say it. I don't like saying it, but if I don't know something, I'm not going to BS my way through it. I'm going to say I don't know. And many times when I do that, I'll get additional information, and then I'll tell you when I know. But this is the reason why the Kensington Rune Stone has been dismissed as a hoax, when it is in fact the most important historical artifact in the history of our country, our continent, and arguably the world. And it's being treated like garbage. But I digress.
And Scott, I think
Yeah.
when I saw it, it was up in Alexandria or maybe Kensington. Where is the rune stone located right now?
It's still there. It's still there at the Rune Stone Museum. And
In
they've been
Alexandria?
good. They've been very good stewards with it. And, we've worked very closely with them. But at some point, it has to go back to the Smithsonian. But the problem is it rewrites our history. And there are people that, aren't going to fare too well when this story is told. And the number one antagonist in this story is the Roman Church. And I'm sorry to say that. Some people might be offended, but you know what? Get over it. It's the truth. And if you look in the mirror and you're honest with yourself, you know damn well what they've done.
Yeah.
And the number one thing they've done that's hurt our society and hurt humanity is they deified women. They pushed them down into the shadows when in fact the true ideology that they suppressed was this dual gendered God that is represented by this hooked X symbol. And actually what it is a straight line stonemason's version of the Hebrew Aleph, which is the first letter in the Hebrew alphabet that stands for the A sound. And funny, it's being used for the A sound on the Kensington Rune Stone.
And it is in Alexandria, correct?
It is in Alexandria, yes.
And Ivor's got a question, so I'm going to unmute Ivor real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
You probably are already aware of this, but I read, and this was many years ago, and I do not have a citation, I'm sorry. But I read that that a missionary priest with early French voyageurs recorded in his log that they had encountered a tribe of Indians in what would now be western Minnesota.
And eastern North Dakota and South Dakota, yes. The
With
Mandan. The
blonde
Mandan.
hair, blue eyes. Yes,
Yep.
then they were Mandan. They think that they were killed off by one of the epidemics.
Well,
You're aware.
actually, what you're talking about is George Catlin was actually lived with the Mandan for 2 years in 1834 and 1835. And then in 1837, the U.S. Army gave the Mandan Indians smallpox infected blankets and basically wiped them out. But you're right, they were blonde-haired, blue-eyed Indians. And there's a really good book that was written by a Jewish scholar. She was actually a Chicago patent attorney. Her name was Henrietta Mertz. And if you look at the book, she talks about George Catlin's work and she compares and finds 29 exact parallels within the Mandan tribe and the Moses Exodus story. And so these are the descendants of the Templars. The Templars intermarried with the indigenous people on this continent, and there's all kinds of them. I'll tell you another one who was a descendant of a marriage between an indigenous woman and a Templar Knight. Have you ever heard of Sacagawea? Sacagawea?
Sure.
She was a descendant of a Templar Knight. And it's not a coincidence that she ended up meeting with Lewis and Clark and helped them make their way west, but that's a whole nother story. But anyway, what you mentioned is absolutely true. And if you want to read about it in depth, George Catlin is the one that originally lived with the Mandan and talked about this, but Henrietta Mertz did a beautiful job with her analysis. And I talk about all of this in my Akhenaten to the Founding Fathers book that you mentioned. So
Okay, thank you.
did I answer your question?
Yes, you did.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway, getting back to this, as we said, the Aleph is the first letter in the Hebrew alphabet. When we get into some of the more esoteric aspects, it represents the oneness of God. In other words, it represents God, okay? And what I proposed before I knew about any of this, way back when I wrote my Hooked X book, is that the symbolism of the Hooked X represents, if you take an X and you chop it in half, the V represents the vessel, the chalice, the womb, the symbol for the female. When you invert it 180 degrees, you have the sword, the phallic, the symbol for the male. Together in an X, you have that allegorical union of male, female, heaven and earth, good, bad, light, dark. And then the hook in the upper right creates another V, a child, a daughter in this case, inside the womb of its mother, which I call the Holy Trinity, right? The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And I ask people all the time, what is the Holy Spirit? And they go, well, it's the Spirit in you. And I say, look, you can't even define it, right? Because it's not well defined. But what it represents is something more simple. You've got the Father, you got the child. Who's missing? Mama, right? She's been written out of this story by the Roman Church. No, she's right there in the Hooked X, and she conveniently is on top above the male nurturing the female. So all of this is consistent with that ideology and the oneness of God. So when you see it, it's an acknowledgement of deity. It's the author of the inscription, the carver, acknowledging deity and asking for protection to protect this sacred document. It's meant to instill interconnectedness and a shared purpose. That's what the Hebrew Aleph means. In this case, the mission to establish the new sanctuary in the West that became the United States of America. That mission in the documents was called the covenant. And it's used within the KRS, the Kensington Rune Stone, and other Templar documents as an acknowledgement of deity and a plea of protection of these sacred documents. Okay, let's get back to the Book of the Wars of the Lord. Now, this is a free page that was tucked inside the book that Bill Jackson sold to the Vatican. He got a lot of money for that document. I can't say how much he got, but he got a lot of money. And part of the reason he got a lot of money for it was because of documents like this. But what are we looking at here? We're looking at a photograph that was on a roll of film that was in that material that Jackson's son Mark gave to Don in 2004. He didn't get that roll of film developed until 2008. And 3 of those photographs are pictures of this page. And so, in essence, we have that page that he sold to the Vatican. I love this guy. In fact, everything he sold was photographed, and we have all the photos. So we have the entire document. So what does it say? Well, this is what, if you Google right now, Book of the Wars of the Lord. By the way, I had never heard of it before. Had any of you guys ever heard of it? Nobody I've talked to, and I've talked to biblical scholars, and they'd never heard of it. It's one of several non-canonical books referenced in the Bible, which have now been completely lost. It is mentioned in Numbers. Well, guess what, guys? It's not lost. We have 2 parts of it, and you've seen part of one, and now I'm going to show you the other. This area that's boxed right here, the goddess Wisdom has commanded us, and we have obeyed, but we set not foot into Edom. Then a cloud descended from heaven, and out from the cloud, these are the people of the Lord, and I am their goddess. You will depart this place or be destroyed, for I do battle this day for the sons of Dan. What becomes patently obvious within this story is that the goddess Wisdom is on an equal level with the Lord. Here we have the dual-gendered Godhead again, and she is the goddess Wisdom. The church doesn't want any of this stuff, do they? Well, too bad, because here it is. Later on in the document, it says this: the leader of the Edomites sent forth his chariots into the shallows of the river. Then did a silver beast descend from the cloud in the likeness of a great bird, and spat lightning bolts from its wings into the water, and the horses of the chariots died, and the men of the chariots shook as with palsy, fell to the waters and drowned. Then a great flame emitted from the mouth of the beast, and the host of the Edomites were consumed. The hell? You tell me, guys. Silver beasts descend from the clouds in the likeness of a great bird?
If you got questions, raise your hand. Scott will take them. I'll unmute you if you got questions.
I'm asking. I'm not. I don't know what the hell this means. I know what I think it means. This is the second time. Actually, we have probably 4 or 5 different references to this Angel K.
Yep, and Brad C's got a question. So I'm gonna ask Brad to unmute.
Yeah. Go ahead. He's still muted.
Neil.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Super. The script with this, it does seems like these folks that came down in the Silver Beast weren't really that friendly to humans.
No, they were and let me apologize first. I'm not reading the entire message because it's fairly lengthy and a lot of it is not germane. I'm trying to get to what I consider the meat of the matter, and that's the Silver Beast. But what's happening here is you've got one group, the Edomites, and then you have the Sons of Dan, and they're about to have a conflict, right? So what happens is the goddess comes out and basically says to the Edomites, back off, or I'm gonna wipe you out. I do battle this day for the sons of Dan. And they didn't stop. So they went into the water. So she called down the silver beast, and it was the beast that took them out. So they were defending the sons of Dan. Now, I'm not a biblical scholar. I don't know what all this means in a larger context. All I know is, the goddess was taking sides and she was calling down apparently aliens to do the dirty work. That's my interpretation. But I'm open to, this is one of those times where I'm not going to sit here and tell you I've got it all figured out. All I know is what I read and what I think it says, what I think it means to me, but that doesn't mean I'm right.
Yep, and Brad's got another question for you.
Go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, this is it just leads from your answer, this question. It sounds like the Silver Beast or this goddess was picking sides, and I wonder if you
Yeah.
have any thoughts as to what was motivating her to choose one versus the other, or perhaps I lost something in the prior discussion.
Well, it's a great question, and honestly, I don't know the answer. There's more in here. I have not really taken time to dive into this. I've talked to people who are biblical scholars that know a lot more about this subject matter. This is not in my wheelhouse, so I'm really not the best person to ask. I was, what's weird is that we've had these photos for about 15 years, but it didn't really mean anything to us. We didn't even look carefully at it because we were running down so many other rabbit holes until the last few years. And then we realized, oh my God, this is significant. And so we're still just trying to sort it out and make sense of it. But I know that it's important. And and we talked about being, thinking critically and being a skeptic, but I don't know what else this could possibly be. It appears to me to be extraterrestrials that are, according, in this document, being in consort with the goddess and doing their dirty work against a group that was being aggressive against, in this case, the Sons of Dan. But I don't know what that means. I don't know if one is a good group or a bad group, who the bad guys are. I just don't know.
Kevin, Kathy's got a question for you.
Hi, Kathy.
Oh, if I could
Hi.
just
Oh, go
make
ahead, Brad.
one more
Can you
observation.
hear me?
Yep, hang on, Kathy.
Brad is just going to ask one more thing. What was that, Brad?
Go ahead.
Yeah, when you talk to the remote viewers, especially the people from Farsight, they're coming along and stating that we've got this alien war out there, and between the good ETs and the bad ETs, even on planet Earth. So this is sort of interesting. Now I need a whole lot more proof because I come out of this like pure skeptic. So like, show me the evidence. But it is interesting how this links back to another historic document, and that's a question of maybe this is just some sort of internal bias to humans, or is there something else behind this? I don't know, but it's quite enlightening. Thank you so much for bringing this forward.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point that you make too. And you could make the argument that it kind of fits that narrative a little bit, but yeah, it's interesting. So, well, thanks, Brad. Those are good questions. Kathy, your turn.
Yeah, hi. I was wondering if you've ever tried to correlate what you're studying, especially in this situation, with what Billy Carson has been studying, because he he knows a vast amount of information about documents and biblical stories and all.
Right.
I listen to him a lot.
Yeah. And I know
I've never
Billy.
heard him talk about this at all.
No, I know Billy personally. I met him in 2020 at the Conscious Life Expo, and he's a great guy. I know he's doing a lot of good work. I haven't seen him since then, but I don't know if he's aware of this work. He gave me a copy of his Emerald Tablets book, and there is sort of a tangential connection between this and some of those old other biblical documents. In fact, in our documents, there is mention of the Emerald Tablet. So that's not part of this, this lecture, but the Emerald Tablet is mentioned. And so I think that there probably is some interconnecting threads. I should probably talk to him when I get a chance. He's a sharp guy, and I respect the work that he's doing. And I think he listened to my lecture that I gave 5 years ago at Conscious Life, and I'm sure he'd find this fascinating.
Yeah.
He'd
Thank you.
probably make his own connections that I'm not even aware of. So that's one of the reasons why I'm out here sharing this information, because I'm sure as hell not going to figure it all out. And and I have a lot of people in my circle that that are a lot smarter than me about certain connected subject matter, and they've really helped me understand better what I think is going on with this and some of the other things. But that's the value of people collaborating and working together. No one person knows it all, and sometimes that critical connecting piece that ties two important parts together will come from the most obscure source that you never saw coming. That's why it's so valuable to work together and share your research. And I get really frustrated when I see people becoming territorial with their research, and they think they're going to have all the answers. And you can get 100 miles further down the road when you share your information, and just do the right thing and give people credit when they deserve it, and they should do the same. But at the end of the day, you can't take it with you, but pushing the narrative forward and the truth forward and help the understanding that everybody can benefit. That's really what the bottom line is here. So let's all work together.
Yeah, and
Great, thank you.
Ivor's
Thank you.
got his hand up. Maybe Ivor has some answers for us. So let's see
I don't have any answers, but I do have an observation about this script, and that is that the line, "and the men of the chariot shook as with a palsy, fell to the waters and drowned." That sounds like electric shock.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so whoever wrote this probably was aware of what lightning was, but did not know that lightning is a form of electricity, and may not have known the symptoms of electric shock. The other thing is that the horses died. They said the horses died. They didn't say they shook with palsy. But if the horses were struck with an electric current of sufficient voltage, then their hearts would have seized, and they probably would have just dropped into the water or just dropped to the ground.
Right.
So it seems like when I'm reading this script, it seems like someone who did not know what the symptoms of electric shock were for man or horse was reporting what they saw in using the language that they understood.
Actually, that's a really good observation, and it's something
It lends credence.
it did well. No, it didn't occur to me at all, but it absolutely lends credence. And here's a fantastic example of what I was just talking about. Until you mentioned it, I don't know if anybody else would ever mention it, but it's a really good observation. Thank you.
And Joe has a question too. So I'm gonna ask Joe to unmute so he can ask his question.
I didn't really have a question. I was just going to state that in 72, when I was stationed with aliens, this seems to fit their belief structures.
I'll say that again. I didn't catch that.
Okay, in 1972, I was in the U.S. Air Force,
Okay.
and I spent time with aliens. And this fits their belief structures.
Oh, it does.
The group that I was with, yes.
Okay. Okay.
And there was another group that we were at war with.
Wow.
So,
Well, that's interesting. That's great. That's awesome. By the way, I have a few more slides. I mean, I'm happy to take questions, but I do have a couple more slides. I forget how many, but we're almost to the end.
Go for it.
Okay, let's see. Oh, so we just got this one last month. And Roberta's, so it turns out, no, Roberta was the sister of the girlfriend. Jessica is an intermediary who is a cousin of Roberta. And she is the one that got this material from Roberta and has been giving it to us. So there's 3 women involved, 2 that were living, only 1 is still living. The first one died in 2018. Roberta died last year, and then, or I should say in 2023. And Jessica is still with us. But anyway, Jessica gave us this message, and it's basically zodiac symbols and others symbols. It's not the same as the zodiac cipher you saw before. It's different. But we were able to decipher the alphabet because the first word in the upper left-hand corner is Yeshua, Jesus. Yeshua, Jesus, wanted a dual-gendered God religion. Simon and the Roman Jew sold him out. He, his wife, children preached in the Northland and the Scots, but only the temple of the goddess and the Kohan and my people listened. Now hold on one sec. Hey, Haley, do you have a second? I want you to come here and tell them something. Okay. The Northland would be Scandinavia. The Temple of the Goddess people are the Temple of the Goddess in upstate New York. The Kohan is one of the 12 tribes, and my people listened are the indigenous people. But I want Haley here to just talk a little bit about her research and why suddenly he, meaning Jesus, his wife, children, preached in the Northland and the Scots. So take it from there.
Okay, so part of why this is so significant is because I spent half the year living in Scotland, doing research, but also guiding tours there. And what is so significant about this is one of the locations we take our guests that was initially a place of interest through my own research is an island in the Inner Hebrides called Iona.
Of Scotland.
Yes. Have you ever heard of Iona? Yes. Okay. So it's actually Hebrew, a Hebrew name for dove. So what is a Hebrew name doing in this ancient place that spoke Gallic, right? So this was very strange to begin with because this is a very ancient name, and it was a place that was associated with Druidic worship. Now, there was a local legend that Mary Magdalene was buried there, also a local legend associated with a monk from the 1st century who was known as Mal Martin. And so Mal Martin was essentially a title for Martin, and the first or the last son of Mary Magdalene and Jesus allegedly was born on the Isle of Iona. And so if you look at Iona from a bird's eye view, it looks like the shape of a dove. Now, there are other legends about Mary Magdalene being buried on the island and other stories that are preserved in Gallic hymns that talk about the wandering Christ bride and child on the western coast of Scotland, and also about the Christ child. It's talked about, and then also there's a hill named after Jesus, but it's not Iosa, which is the Gallic name for Jesus. It happens to be Essa, which is the Egyptian Coptic name, which indicates that Jesus himself would have had to have been there saying to address him as Essa. So with that said, this mountain is named after him on the western coast. And so it's interesting that the Gallic people would call it Essa instead of Iosa if he were not to have been visiting the western coast of Scotland.
So I guess, thank you, Haley. That's really good stuff. And, I remember when she first brought up this idea that Jesus visited Scotland, and frankly, I thought she was, smoking dope or something, but it turns out that she was right on. And here we have it apparently being validated. And everything that's in this message, it's a very short message, but it's obviously very powerful and frankly, very timely. because, I don't want to get into politics, but our founding fathers incorporated separation of church and state into our Constitution for a reason. And things are sort of moving away from what the tenets of that our founders intended, frankly. And I think what we're seeing here with these documents coming out, I'm struck by the timing. It seems to be very timely, but it also is on point with research that Haley's done, with research that I've done, research that other people have done, and it's all coming together and it's telling a consistent, cohesive, and in my view, a conclusive story. And it's one I think we need to pay attention to because, look, you can be whatever religion you want or not want. You don't have to be any religion. That's the beauty of this country and what our founders intended. And I get concerned when I see people talking about, bringing religion back into our schools and back into, everybody's daily life. And that's not what our founders intended. And in fact, if we're going to do that, then maybe we ought to go back and look at what the true teachings of Jesus were, which apparently is this dual gendered God religion, which isn't going to sit very well with some people, but facts are facts, and here they are. And this actually makes more sense anyway, in my view, but I'll leave it at that. Now, let me just keep going. I put this picture in here to remind all of you that the reason that the Templars had so much success and my people listened, it's saying the same thing. The indigenous people are matriarchal. They believe in a balance between male and female, and if anything, they will defer to the feminine. And that is the true ideology of the Templars. They were not Catholic. They pretended to be Catholic. And they used the Virgin Mary as a metaphor for the ancient goddess that they venerated. In fact, that's the reason they got in trouble. That's one of the main reasons why they were arrested, tortured, and burned in 1307. You burn somebody because you're pissed. And they were pissed off that they realized that the Templars weren't the good Christians that they thought they were. They were these monotheists that believed in the dualistic aspects. That is why they forged such a deep spiritual bond with the indigenous people through ritual, mutual respect, and intermarriage. And that's why they were all over the Americas and in fact all over the world, because the indigenous people to this day embrace this ancient ideology that the Templars were an outgrowth of. So that's the real story, folks, not what you're reading or seeing on television. That's a bunch of BS. They captured Jerusalem to establish a base of operations in the region. That's how they got their start. Why did they want a base of operations in that region? So they could go into Egypt, into Turkey, where places like Göbekli Tepe that was covered up 13,000 years ago. So they could go back and recover the documents, the knowledge, the maps, the ideology, the remains, and the artifacts, and then bring them over here. That's the story. And our founding fathers knew it. That gold was left there for them. They recovered that gold at multiple places, including on Oak Island, and they used it to fund the revolution. And so that's the real story. And you know what? In a year and a half, we're going to celebrate our 250th anniversary. And what's really unfortunate is from the time of our founding fathers to now, we have forgotten our own history within Freemasonry and Templarism. And I'm a Freemason and I'm a Knights Templar in 3 different orders. But I know what the truth is. And this is the true story. It needs to be told now. And thank you guys for giving me the opportunity. So let's just give you one more little shot here. Do you remember these parchments? Do you want to know what the message is?
We'd love to know what the message is.
This is Theban script right here. And this is the alphabet right here. And Misha, the daughter of Elizabeth, sister of John the Baptist, of the river Jordan, took the red wine with the poppy in it, having been there for 7 days, and gave it to the soldiers, saying, a gift from the Arimathian. Then came Ishmael, the brother of Benjamin, and the Magdala, Mary Magdalene. The soldiers are asleep. They took him out and put him on a stretcher. She said, fold the headcloth alone. We lift up Jesus and took him to sleep with his ancestors. But Ishmael with his new beard stayed. We have destroyed all traces of our being here. We are unclean. We fled Jerusalem, and all of Judea was against us. We fled to the north. Always Thendra. Haley. They fled north. They fled north.
Yes.
All of Judea is against us. We fled to the Northland, Scandinavia and the British Isles. I know, but it says it in this message too.
Message.
This is the two messages that came out of the ornament. This is a different message. I just caught this now. Always Thendra. We fled to the north. I was thinking they went to Lebanon. No, remember they went to France. They went to the British Isles. They must have gone to Scandinavia too. Holy crap. Yeah, and if you haven't seen it, watch this show. Actually, we just got word they're doing another season. We got a green light, so you'll see more of this. And if you guys are interested in my books, here they are, and the new one, which tells you all about what happened at Oak Island. And it's good stuff, folks. So if anybody has any questions, fire away.
Yeah, and I think I want to see if I can give everyone the ability to unmute themselves. I hope that's not a bad idea. So let's see.
It's fucking cool.
I'm going to say ask all to unmute or allow. Yeah. You can raise your hand or unmute. I think you can unmute yourself. So.
Wow.
Scott, it's Kathy.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi. Hey, any way I can get my time back from watching hours of Oak Island? I think I've seen every episode. And they've never found anything on it.
Well, they can't find anything if there's nothing there.
Right,
You know,
right.
I've been approached by them over the years 4 times. They said, in fact, well, he passed away a few years ago. The executive producer of Prometheus, I mean, the president, the guy that started the company, Kevin Burns, begged me to come on that show. And I said, Kevin, I can't come on your show. He said, why not? I said, because you plant things. He said, what do you mean? And I told him. And he said, well, we didn't tell people it was real. I said, Kevin, you give them the impression it's the same thing. I will not get involved in bullshit. I'm happy to, to get people excited going into commercial, but I'm not going to lie to the audience. And they lie every day. And so, what can I tell you? I'm sorry. People ask me, I don't watch the show. I can't stand it. It's like there's nothing. It never goes anywhere. It's just.
No. Thank you. Thank you.
I feel you. Let me just say that. Oh, is that Jane?
Yes, it is.
Oh, hi, Jane.
Hi. So I have a question.
Okay.
They fled to the north. So there was no resurrection.
Exactly.
Yep.
Well, okay. Let's be honest about this, okay? What I say to people whenever we have this discussion about these kinds of this subject matter, I said, are we talking about real life or are we talking about faith and religion? Because if you're talking about faith and religion, you can't talk about real life because they're mutually exclusive. And I just want to make sure that people understand I'm not here to try to offend anybody. I'm not trying to attack your religion. You can believe whatever you want, right? But if we're talking about real life, until I see somebody rise from the dead or a virgin birth, and I'm sure women are going to be chuckling in the background, I'm not buying it, okay? That's just me. And I'm talking about real life. I'm not talking about faith and religion. You can believe whatever you want. That's your business. Knock yourself out. But this is a bunch of BS, in my opinion. And this is the truth about the resurrection story. There was no resurrection. It's an allegory.
Right.
Okay? It's about the death and resurrection of the sun on the winter solstice when it stands still, when it's dark for 3 days, right? And what a lot of people don't understand is that Mary Magdalene and Jesus are symbolic of the sun and the planet Venus, who in mystical circles are the eternal travelers. They always travel together. When she is a morning star, she rises, he follows, and then she disappears, right? Because the sun overshadows her and you can't see her, but she's still there, right? And when Venus is an evening star, he sets, she follows. But they travel together relative to our observations on Earth. The mystic travelers, right? That is the resurrection story, the true resurrection story, which is the same story as Isis and Osiris, and the death and resurrection story that's in every culture throughout the world, because they all experience the solstices. And that's what's really going on. So there.
There's even a quote, Pope Leo X, that was in one of Freddie Silva's books, that this Pope commented on what a ruse we pulled off on those people as far as Jesus, that they bought it hook, line, and sinker. That's a quote from Pope Leo, but I don't remember the exact verbiage.
No, I know what he said. I'll paraphrase it. He said, this myth of Jesus has served us well.
That's it. Yep. Interesting.
Very good.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Darlene has a question.
Hi, Scott, this was an excellent presentation. And I'm glad I got to watch it.
Good, thank you.
Could you go back to the slide where you had a saying that Adam and Eve were two children? It sort of blew my mind and I got lost and I didn't hear anything else on that slide. Could you go over it again?
Yeah, I'm looking for it here. Here it is. Yeah. Yeah. Aku of the Anu people of Nod in the land of the three rivers. Anatolia knew the women of the little people and beget the Yazidi to use for the sacrifice to all the spirits but Yah and Wei, children of the Yazidi, against the law of Aku. They beget two childs, Adam and Eve, who became us. So basically what it's saying here is Adam and Eve, well, in the Bible it says Adam and Eve were created by God, right?
Yes.
Well, Yahweh is God, right? That's the Hebrew name for God. But here they break it up into Yah and Wei, male and female, that obviously procreated and had two children. Does that make sense?
Yes, from what you're saying. I'm just trying to figure out the rest of this. So
yeah. Well, I will be publishing all this in the new book that's coming out, and you know, this is a work in progress. I'm not even beginning to pretend like I've got this all figured out. I don't. What I got figured out is what is important to me is this whole hooked X, dual gendered aspects of God. And here we see it with Yahweh, and we see it in these other documents. It's just amazing. So the two big secrets are the dual gendered Godhead, that is in the Book of the Wars of the Lord. This is part one of Book of the Wars of the Lord that we have. And then the other part, I shared with you part of it, but there's probably more, and who knows what else is there. But it's interesting that the Book of the Wars of the Lord, Amon sent CLY to go recover it and give it to him. And then he took it up in the heavens, I guess, because it said it is no longer amongst the world of men. And that was in that was in 1898, circa 1900. Well, we weren't ready for that back then, were we?
No.
The question is,
We're
are we
still
ready?
not.
Are we ready for it now? I think so. And the talk of aliens back then, are you kidding me? Forget it. But now, I mean, don't you find this timing incredible? I do.
Yes, with all that's going on and trying to
Yes,
get out now. Yes,
absolutely.
it's incredible.
And this with MUFON and everybody, all these groups that are taking a serious look at this extraterrestrial phenomena and all aspects related to it, it's a beautiful thing because, you know, they say a lot of people say, oh, this is all BS, but I mean, you know, that old phrase where there's smoke, there's fire. There's a hell of a lot of smoke billowing here, and there's a fire burning someplace, and we're getting closer and closer to that fire and that truth. And I think this is helping us. That's my personal opinion. And I think that maybe now, 120 something years after it was recovered, maybe now humanity's ready for it. As far as I'm concerned, ready or not, here it comes.
What is going to be the title of your new book, and when do you estimate it coming out?
Well, I can tell you what the cover is. The Templars Covenant, right now the working title is the Templars Covenant in America. But I don't know if that's going to be the final, the final thing or not. But I want to have this, Don and I are writing feverishly. We have one more message that's coming. We should get it here next week. And then I don't know if we're going to be getting any more after that, but I don't know how many times I've said that. And then something happens. So, but I'm ready to finalize that book. There is a lot of material here to unpack. But at the end of the day, it boils down to these two bottom line conclusions: the dual gendered Godhead and aliens. Pretty good stuff.
Yeah.
And Brad C has a question or comment still, or again.
Yes, thank you. Scott, can you flick back to the slide that shows your 3 books? I think it was the very last one.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And then
Now, yeah.
And then
Oh, sorry, go
I
ahead.
got, this is the other one. I'm being cute. I just didn't have enough space, but in sequence, if somebody wanted to, get the full version, you start with the Kensington Rune Stone here, the upper left, and then the Hooked X, and then Akhenaten, and then Cryptic Code, and then the Oak Island book is the most recent one. But a lot of this Cremona document material is in Akhenaten and Cryptic Code. A lot of the background information. In fact, if someone was just going to buy one book, I'd say get Cryptic Code, because we go into, I tell that story in detail about the Templar mission in 1178 to 1180. And it's fantastic stuff. It's fantastic. And the rest of the book is good too. I mean, call me biased, but I think it's great.
Scott, when I saw this notification from Minnesota MUFON, I'm going, well, this is really out of my league. I'm science-based, show me the evidence and I'll go where truth is. I started as a skeptic, and then I figured, okay, I'll drop in for 5 to 7 minutes, Scott. Then I'll just move on to the rest of my day because it's going to be boring as hell. And Scott, I kid you not, my jaw was on the floor for the entire presentation. I could not believe it.
Thank you.
It's
Well, I
more than
appreciate
kudos. This was so amazing, and how points in history sort of are flowing back, and now we're looking at it from a whole different, well, more data than we ever had before. And this is going, whoa, this is something else. And yeah, you summed it up right. There's two major points to be taken away: aliens, and there's something there with the Templars. So kudos. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this afternoon. Yeah,
I
it
hope
was
I hope
mind-boggling.
you recorded that. That was fantastic. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Seriously. Thank you.
Yep, our recording is still going, so we should have that.
Okay. Just my guys just showed up. They just opened the door, so I should probably check out. But does anybody have one last thing?
Just a big thanks. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Absolutely.
This was
Fantastic.
absolutely enlightening.
Thank you so much.
It was
Thank
my
you, thank
pleasure,
you.
guys. All I can tell you, there's a lot more that we have, and there's a lot more coming. So stay tuned, okay?